Are going to start in middle of a mimer of the Rebbe from the year Tafshin Chafei, the mimer associated with Pesach, but speaks about the topic of Simcha. And this mimer is this mimer was speaking about the beginning of Shir Hashirim, and the beginning of Shir Hashirim, which many people have associated with Pesach, the beginning of Shir Hashirim. This mimer is something that deals with, says that Toiv doidecha miyoyin, that your love, the love of the Yidden and Hashem, are greater and more powerful than wine. And they associate the idea of wine is the idea of celebration and partying and joy. And he was analyzing throughout the mimer the idea of wine and the idea that by the Seder we have the three matzahs and we have the 4 cups of wine. And even though the three matzahs are something that's a Torah obligation, or the matzahs by the Seder is a Torah obligation, the wine is only a drabanan, only a rabbinic obligation. And despite that, the wine has a higher source because this is the Medibri Seifrim, this is the Chachamim's takana, and therefore it comes from a higher level, and therefore the Simcha as well is a very high level. And even though it seems to be expansive, the higher the level is, the more bittul it demands, and so on. So now he's going to ask a classic question that we've also addressed in some other Maamarim, but it adds some more nuances over here about Simcha fitting in with bittul. So we'll start from line 5. This will be understood according to explanation what it says. That the humble ones will increase, or those that are humble, and Hashem will increase in joy. Later on, we'll explain a little bit a different way of reading this passage. The Simcha, we need to understand the connection between joy and humility. Seemingly, they're opposite lines, opposite approaches. Joy is expansive. The idea of humility is more constricted and more limiting to the person. So that the Rebbe is first going to define what does humility mean. The idea behind this is the idea of humility is not feeling low because of how deficient he is, because of what they are lacking, because of what they are missing, but rather because he doesn't find good in his soul, and that's why he has this type of attitude and feeling of humility. No, rather, the person has qualities, and not only does he have qualities, sometimes they have a quality or qualities, and one is not aware, and one is not cognizant of and one is not conscious of the qualities, but rather a humble person, not only does he have qualities, but he also knows what his qualities are. Rather, he does not feel himself, and he does not consider himself because of his qualities. Similar to what it says, that the man Moshe was very humble. Then all people, this means though he knew how he was greater in quality and level than every person, he wasn't oblivious to the fact that he was a person that had accomplished so much. He was on Har Sinai and didn't eat for 40 days and 40 nights 3 times. And he brought down the Torah, and he took the Eden out of Mitzrayim, and he brought all the miracles about in the desert. He was not living in some type of imaginary world where he wasn't aware of this. So he was aware of this, and he knew all of his accomplishments. So despite that, he was humble. Though he knew great advantage and quality over every person, still in all, he was the most humble from all people. The reason for this, why he was the most humble, first of all, he says, in addition to what's explained in a different place. His primary humility was in comparison to the generation of the heels of Mashiach. That the avoid of those living on the heels of Mashiach, just before Mashiach's coming, involve much sacrifice their service. And Moshe Rabbeinu was humbled when he saw with his Ruach HaKodesh what type of self-sacrifice the Yidden would have to go through. And the Rebbe in other places explains it doesn't only mean the physical self-sacrifice that we've seen in the earlier generations and so on, but we're talking about even the self-sacrifice of standing up tall, even though there are scoffers and those that put down a religion and Yiddishkeit and so on, and still know we have the pride to stand fast and committed to what we believe. That Mesiras Nefesh as well, Moshe Rabbeinu felt humbled before, and that's why he was humbled from all people. But this is a unique, specific expression, and it goes specifically on the generations of Mashiach's time. The simple meaning is from every person, Moshe Rabbeinu felt humble. How is that? Even though he knew all the great qualities that he had, like we mentioned before. It continues on line 18, because he knew that all of his qualities came and stemmed from what he was given from above. Beginning from when he was born, his spiritual state was so great that it said that the house, the room that he was born in, filled with light. And Hashem revealed himself to him and chose him to take the Yinar Mitzrayim and brought him up on Har Sinai. So he looked at all of these things as gifts that came from above. If they would give from above these powers to a different person, these capabilities, if they were given to the different person, he would also be in the level of Moshe Rabbeinu. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu thought. But that is only a reason why Moshe Rabbeinu would not hold himself higher than others. Why would it be more humble than others if he would feel that anyone had his gifts would have accomplished as much as him? Because he thought that Moshe Rabbeinu thought that if someone else would have been given the gifts that he was given, they would have done more with their gifts than he did. And that's why he felt humble before everyone. Through this meditation, thinking into this idea that everything I've accomplished was really because of gifts from above. So every person could be humble, even from a goy. And the Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe explains on the words Kol HaAdam, that when it says Adam alone without a hey, that goes on Adam. Atom is going on the Jewish people. When it says Ha-Adam also goes on a goy. Skip the parentheses. How is he humble even before a goy? Call him and also by Shem Echad, because the entire faith and belief that a Yid has in one Eibishter, he thinks to himself that's not a result of his own doing. It's only because of an inheritance that he received from Avraham Avinu, like we know in Perikut Ches and Tanya, chapter 18, where he speaks about that the core and innate belief that every Yid has in Hashem is something that they inherited from Avraham Avinu. Therefore, he has no reason to feel himself haughty and arrogant, even compared to a guy, because he wasn't given that opportunity. Let's skip over a little bit over here. So he says, let's go to the next page, line 18. In a klolus inyan ha'anavam, the general idea of humility, kosherim inyan hasimcha, is actually not only not contradictory with joy, it doesn't contradict joy and happiness, but actually it's connected with happiness. Because of one's lack of feeling of oneself, one's lack of recognition of one's own being and self-importance. He doesn't consider himself important. So then he knows that he's not owed anything. Anything that he is given, he is satisfied with whatever he has, and he's very happy with it. If a person feels that he's a very accomplished person, so then he feels that he has earned different types of rewards and different types of gifts and so on. But if a person feels that it's not their doing, it's all gifts from Hashem, so anything he has and anything he gets, he's happy with. So move on. So the Rebbe takes a little bit a step further. The true idea of a godly joy is simcha pshuta alalakus, is a pure, unadulterated delight about and for godliness. Beli shum hergish atzmi, without any sense of self. V'hainu shesimcha ba'ofen shel bittul atzmusa. His joy is in such a way that he nullifies his essence. The simcha that his joy is not because of how good his service is to Hashem. He's joyous from godliness itself. He's joyous that God exists and he has a connection with him and so on. You say them as even more so that concerning godliness itself, we know there are different levels, but his joy is from being completely nullified in Hashem's very essence. Through his connection with Hashem. So then, metaphorically speaking, in Hashem's name, in the name of Yud Kei Vav Kei, it becomes increased. He goes on to the next page, and this is what we said before when it said, what it says in the pasuk, that the humble ones will increase in Havaya, they will increase joy. What does that mean? So instead of the increase is with joy, but rather the joy that they have because they are humble and so totally identified with Hashem, so that adds and increases Shem Yudke Vavke, which is a lower level than Hashem's essence. In other words, this is the great power that we have when we have this total humility and connection to Hashem, and then we're completely joined with Hashem and joyous. But and even in more depth, through the idea of humility and a total nullification, becomes by him the idea of joy. That's no way of expansion and spreading out, meaning that even though usually one would think that a humble person is very introverted and very closed up and so on, but because his humility is in a total state of bittul, so therefore he's not important. The person that is experiencing my own perceptions are not important, and therefore I can be completely expansive. How can I be completely expansive? Isn't expansiveness an expression of ego? It says not necessarily. Since this is not the broadness and expansion of his own existence, he's not a separate entity for himself whatsoever. His entire being is the existence of above. Meaning, so the Rebbe explains as follows. In other places, the Rebbe uses the term that there's a concept by Yigbal Liboy Bedarche Avaya, that his heart rises up in the ways of Hashem. Usually, when we talk about someone rising up, that's considered arrogant. But if a person is rising up with in the ways of the Eibishter, in other words, he has pride, not boastful pride, but he takes pride in what he's doing, and they're being elevated and feeling elevated by their connection with Hashem. So then it's a positive, it's not a negative, because it's not about their own ego. It's actually because their ego is completely sublimated to Hashem, that they're being proud and standing fast. It's not about them. Just like in a simple sense that we spoke about before, that in the generation of Mashiach's times, we're standing fast and we are, if you will, stubborn in our commitment to Yiddishkeit. This standing fast and having this type of commitment to Yiddishkeit is not an ego trip. We're not doing it because we're egotistical. We're doing it because since we have no other existence except for Hashem, so therefore our entire existence is focused on Hashem's will. So it's not a stubbornness that's born out of ego. And the same thing, the joy is not born out of ego. It's something that's a result of a total sublimation to Hashem. Another example is the Chazal uses an expression that says, Eved Melech Melech. the servant of a king is like the king. What does that mean? If a servant of the king walks into the room and they have an announcement to make or whatever, so everybody's quiet. The servant, is just a servant. He's not significant seemingly. But at the time when he enters into the room to make an announcement on behalf of the king, it's not like him entering the room. The king is entering the room, but through the servant. The same thing. Someone that has total bittul. So by them, they are not, they do not identify themselves and see themselves as something separate. So when they have this type of expansiveness and broadness and saying we need to conquer the world, let's say with Torah mitzvahs, and going out there and schlepping people to do mitzvahs and making a big tumult and making a big deal of Yiddishkeit, it's not because it's my ego. It is because I'm totally sublimated to Hashem, and therefore also I have a complete simcha as well. And then the Rebbe talks an interesting story over here. I'm not going to go into the entire story, but let's see over here, Oisvav. Let's start learning a little bit in Oisvav. Actually, maybe we will learn a little bit of the story. It's an interesting story anyway. This is a Maamar the Rebbe said on Shabbos HaGodel, the 8th of Nisan, in Tavshin Chav Hey. In Tavshin Chav Hey was Yud Aleph Nisan, was the Rebbe's 63rd birthday. So therefore, that Yud Aleph Nisan, he would begin to recite Kapitel Samach Daled, chapter 64 until its conclusion and the seal of that chapter in Tillim is that a tzaddik will rejoice in Havaya. So again, it's again the same theme like we've been talking about before. The joy of the tzaddik is in and with Hashem. Simcha pshuta cause a pure, unadulterated joy about godliness. The loy hergish atzmai, without any sense of self. Being that they are totally nullified. There's no other being whatsoever. Only the existence of Hashem alone. Because of this, that becomes by the person the idea of joy. There's no way that he expands because of it, and he spreads out because of it, because that's the nature of joy. In other times we've spoken about this, that a person that, for example, is normally very quiet and very introverted, when it's the time, let's say, of a chasana of a child, all of a sudden this person will be dancing or will be hugging everybody and will be talking and so on, and you never knew this person could string two words together, because joy brings the state of expansiveness, etc. And this expansiveness is not his own ego. The expansiveness by the tzaddik, by the expansiveness of the humble one, is a result of his joy with Hashem. Since it's a simcha in Hashem. So, in addition to what it says over there, Yismach Tzadik Ba'avaya, the Rebbe is going to bring what it says throughout that chapter in Tehillim. The Rebbe is going to explain that entire chapter, chapter 64, deals with a prophecy that David HaMelech spoke about, events that happened with Daniel, and Daniel was held in great esteem by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Bavel. But obviously, the officers and ministers that were there were very jealous of him, and they were looking for a way to be able to undermine Daniel and hopefully have Nebuchadnezzar kill him. And to do so, they conceived an interesting plot. And they decided that they knew that Daniel was a Frum Yid and he davened 3 times a day. And as we'll soon see, that it says that about his davening 3 times a day. And they decided they would get the king, the Nebuchadnezzar, to decree that for the next month, everybody needs to only serve and pray to him and to no other gods. And they knew that Daniel would not stoop to that and not cease praying to his God, to Hashem. And that's when they'd be able to say, give a look, he's disloyal, etc., you need to kill him. And there was the whole story with the lion's den and so on. So let's see how the story, the Medrash Tillim, shows the story connected with Kapitel 64 until. It says line 16. We could add concerning this. I'm sorry, it wasn't Nebuchadnezzar. Excuse me. It was Daryavish threw him into Legoiva Arroyes to the lions den. Yeah, Kadosh Baruch Hu David Ma'oisn Daniel, that Hashem let David know what they will be doing to Daniel prophetically. But all of his palvim is Marzeh, and David HaMelech davened for Daniel in this chapter until Proteus, and the Medrash Tilm explains more in detail. When the minister spoke to the king with trickery, because they weren't doing it for the king's sake. They were doing this to be able to entrap Daniel. That for a duration of 30 days, no one should pray before any other god except for the Yavish. The king followed through and made such a decree. Daniel would daven. And it says in the Sefer Daniel, all the Besa, he went up to his home, and in his upper story, he opened up his windows towards Yerushalayim. He used to daven 3 times a day. And he said, my God, Hashem, listen to my voice when I speak. That's a quote from a pasuk of Perek Samach Dal Until. When the ministers were searching for Daniel, they found him standing and davening. So Daniel addressed Hashem, Rebbeinu Shalom, Master of the world. They noticed me, they found me. And he said, another pasuk over there in chapter Samach Dal, hide me from the plots of the wicked people, from the schemes of those that are evildoers. That's Mamshech Medrash Tillim, and he continues over there in Medrash Tillim. Once the ministers came and tattletaled on Daniel to the king, Amr Lahem, so the king told them, Einatem Namanim. He realized that these officers are trying to get Daniel. I don't believe you. Just because you told me that you caught him davening, that doesn't mean anything to me. When Mincha time came, his Chol he started to daven. And even though he knew that he was already caught once, but he said, Amr said, B'shvil Eilor Hashem Einim Ispalel. Because of these wicked people, am I not going to daven? But to me, it would have wonderful. Yeshleimer B'diuk, and the Rebbe says this is very exact. Kivim Shegia Mincha. Why specifically Mincha davening? Tfilos Mincha davke. After Ispal Kol Gimel Tfilos. Though, like we said before, the pasuk in Daniel that he davened all 3 tfilos. He davened. This is similar to what's explained in the explanation of Maamar Chazal. A person should always be careful with mincha davening. Navi was not answered when he had the contest with the Navi Abal about whose God is going to answer and take and accept their sacrifices. So even though Eliyahu was davening to Hashem, he only got his response, and the fire came down from heaven. Only El B'Tfil Mincha. So the same thing that everybody has to know the importance of mincha and why is mincha so important. So it's explained. Because by mincha davening, it's the most emphasized idea of leaving behind the paradigm and the limitations of the world. When he ceases in the middle of whatever his business is, whatever they're doing. Shachar is a person often davens before they go to work. Ma'ariv, they often daven after they came back from work. Mincha, a person often needs to stop in the middle of what they're doing to daven mincha. So that is extra special by Hashem. So in a similar vein, the emphasis over there by that story is that Daniel daven mincha. So the ministers told the king, what they did was they obviously brought the king himself over there at that time. You saw with your own eyes that Daniel went against your command to not daven to his God. Therefore, the king had no choice. Once he already made a decree, he had to hold by the decree, and he had to command to throw Daniel into the lions den. She'iran Nesra Daniel Nitzam and Aroyas, when the miracle occurred that the Nile was saved from the lions, Amr Melech, so the officers were trying to, again, this backfired on them. They were trying to sow disrespect and hatred of the king against the Nile, and here the Nile's stock rose even more so in the eyes of the king, because now the king saw what type of unbelievable miracle happened. So they were trying to downplay the miracle. What did they tell the king? You know why the lions didn't hurt the Nile? You know what? The lions are satisfied. They're not hungry. That's why they didn't eat the Nile. Don't think there was anything miraculous over here. So the king was clever in his own right. Amar Lahem, he told his ministers, Im sveim, if you think that they're not hungry, so you yourselves go into the lion's pit over there. As soon as they threw them in, miyad nechlu, immediately the lions ate up those officers and those ministers that tried to kill the Nile. Shenamar, like it says, Behenshcha Mizmer, going on over there again in Kapitel Samach Dalad, Vayoyim Elikim Chetz Pisam, and Hashem threw suddenly at them this spear. In other words, they were all of a sudden, they themselves were killed by their own plot. Kach Namar, therefore it says in Sefer Daniel, that into the lions den they were thrown, inun them, those ministers, B'neiim, their children, the Shem, and their wives were going. Signed by Medrash Tillim, and Medrash Tillim he concludes, have a yismach tzadik yichazan nakum b'goyim. That it says in the earlier chapter in Tillim, in Perek Nun Aleph, in Kapitel Nun Aleph, it says that the tzaddik rejoices because he saw vengeance against his enemy. The Omer Medrash says that also in chapter Samach Daled, in Kapitel Samach Daled 64, it says Yismach Tzadik b'Hashem, that a tzaddik rejoices in Hashem, the Chasaboy, and he shields himself in Hashem. Yishalu kol yishalev, and all straight of heart will praise him. Meaning, but what do we see from this Medrash Tillim? We see an interesting thing. He puts together two different psukim. One pasuk says, Yismach tzaddik kichazanakim, that the tzaddik rejoices because he saw vengeance. The fact that he's rejoicing that he sees vengeance seems to be a personal thing. But in our Kapitel Tillim, it says that the tzaddik rejoices just in Hashem. So the fact that the Medrash Tillim puts these two things together, so we see this type of bittul of the tzaddik. Hainu mashakasav mizmar yismach tzaddik b'Hashem. What it says in this mizmar, in this Kapitel Tillim, that the tzaddik rejoices on Hashem. Mekasher b'Medrash mashakasav le'ilmene yismach tzaddik yichazan nakum, that the tzaddik rejoices because he saw vengeance against his enemies. So now he's going to explain how does that fit together. Seeing vengeance seems to be a personal thing. Rejoicing in Hashem seems to be Hashem's joy. They said as follows. But the concept behind this is, and by the way, this also it has a lot to do with the Haggadah. A lot of the Haggadah deals with Yidden rejoicing on the downfall of their enemies. So, taking consideration what he just now said and what we are going to say, we're going to see that rejoicing in the downfall of our enemies is not just a personal thing, but the more we identify with Hashem, the more it's not about our ego. We are celebrating Hashem's victory because this is the enemies of the Jewish people are interfering with Hashem's plan for this world. And therefore we rejoice when there's the downfall of the enemies. Let's see it inside further, line 21. The idea behind this is the though the avoid is in such a way that a tzaddik rejoices in Hashem. That means that his rejoicing is only in Hashem, without any feeling of self. The kol makom still and all be along with this. There's also the rejoicing for the consequences and the payment that's being collected from the wicked. That's what it says, that the tzaddik rejoices that he saw vengeance. Though one would think that this is something, seeing vengeance is something that's connected with the feeling of the power of his existence. And the reason for that is Because the righteous is not a separate entity whatsoever. And because he's totally nullified. Since his rejoicing is the entire existence of above. Let's skip over so we can conclude the Maamar over here. He says also the same thing. Mashiach's times there will be this type of rejoicing, and this will be accomplished. That the any vengeance and so on will be in a way of bittul, that will be completely a bittul to Hashem. So now he explains that this type of rejoicing of wine is actually a result and a connection of our love and our connection with Hashem. So let's go to line 13. And that's where it says that it says that your love your love is greater than wine. The joy that's connected with wine, that has to do with the revelation of light that's after concealment. True joy is when there was a concealment, when there was something negative, and out of that negative comes out a positive. Just like wine is also that way. Wine is concealed initially in the grape, and then it's something that's revealed. Mamshech Levi, and he continues to explain over there in that Maamar before Hashem, that light and revelation is still the equal with darkness. Hashem is beyond light and darkness. While Zen Nemar, concerning this, it says, that she's galus bechinas mehuse v'atzmuse animshach al Torah mitzvahs, the revelation of Hashem's very essence that comes about through Torah mitzvahs. It's better even than wine, meaning better even than the revelation of light that comes out of the darkness. But it is also the cause for the great joy in Hashem's essence. According to what's explained previously, the ultimate perfect type of joy is when the joy is in Hashem's very essence, how they move, and it's understood. It's possible to be both together. The revelation of light that affects joy, which we said is the idea of wine, in such a way that has the revelation of Hashem's essence is beloved. So, in other words, the joy is connected with the revelation of Hashem's beloved. This has to do, of course, with Pesach, because, like we said before, Shir Hashirim has to do with Pesach. It's the love of Hashem that's revealed to the Yidden during Pesach. The Inyan Yizeh Yir B'Shleimus L'Asad Love, this will be in its perfect state when Mashiach comes. Then there will be the actual revelation of Hashem's very essence. And along with this revelation of Hashem's essence will not only be the ultimate nullification, but also the idea of grasping Hashem and comprehending Hashem and the ultimate expansion and broadness, which is a topic that he spoke about earlier in the Maamar, till the essential broadness of Hashem. Therefore, Mashiach comes, there will be the ultimate perfection of joy and song. That's why Shir Hashirim is also referred to and connected with Shekosher Gam Mashidol As Love. He's also connected with the Mashiach of Mashiach's times as Yashir. As says, then he will sing. So the Rashi brings down that why does it say then he will sing? Because it's talking about also Mashiach time. That it says when Mashiach comes, we will give thanks with you with a new song.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar.